Hey folks, it's Jim Chapman. It is Sunday, February 16th, 2020, and I'm bringing you another edition of the Chapman's Paint Place podcast. But this one's going to be different. You're not going to hear anything about paint. Well, maybe. We'll see. But what I'd like to talk about today is my weekend. I did some research for my own podcast this weekend, and I attended the Real Life, Real Crime podcast 1 year anniversary party. This was at a venue in downtown Baton Rouge, and it was fantastic. I have a lot of things to talk about with that, just my perception, and as I was there to do research, what I kind of learned along the way. So to tell you a little bit about my history with real crime and true crime, I have been a true crime fan probably since I could read a book. As soon as I got out of the children's books and started reading real books, I always read true crime stuff. Of course, when I was a kid, I was probably like most guys, wanted to be a police officer. And I actually wanted to be a detective, a homicide detective, oddly enough. But life took over at some point, and I ended up becoming a paint salesman. And completely happy with that. Totally different life, obviously, than what Mr. Woody Overton and his crew over at Real Life, Real Crime podcast live. Jim Rathmann is his partner in crime, I guess, would be a good analogy there. But he also is the co-host of Real Life, Real Crime. Met both these guys, super nice, and super down to earth. They didn't seem, like the fame was getting to them, and that's always a good thing. So, being that I was such a fan of Real Life, Real Crime, the podcast, and such a fan of real crime in general, this was the perfect opportunity to use as a research project for my own podcast. I kind of parlayed that into a Valentine's Day gift for my wife, so thank you to the Real Life, Real Crime team for allowing me to parlay that. It's always nice when a guy has something other than candy to bring home to his wife for Valentine's Day. So it made me look really good. My wife is a huge fan of the Real Life, Real Crime podcast. So we ventured down there, got there early, took some pictures. First thing I noticed was with the live podcast, what I really liked was the setup. They've obviously invested some good money into a nice backdrop. I really liked they had a little bar table there, one of the little circle tables with a couple of chairs, and that they had the Real Life, Real Crime podcast backdrop behind it. And I just thought that looked really, really cool. It was a really nice setup. They had TVs all over the downstairs of the venue that they were just doing a feed, basically, of the podcast on those TVs. So if you were somewhere where you couldn't see, you could turn your head and boom, you could see everything real time. So that was really nice. It was at the Basin, and they actually have a downstairs and an upstairs. And when I tell you, it was crowded in there. It was crowded, and it's not the venue. It's just the popularity of the folks. These guys have taken off so much. I don't know how many people were there. I'm sure, obviously, they do. But I know the place fit 700 people in it, and I would say there were 700 people there. So maybe somebody can comment on this podcast and give me kind of an exact number. Just curious how many people were there, but I would guess at a minimum between 600 and 700. Unbelievable for a live podcast. Now I do live stuff, but the stuff I do live, obviously, I'm a completely different world, being that I'm in paint. Mine take place during the afternoon, and mine are more education based relative to business. Uh, Much different than what these guys are doing, and what they're doing is really taking off. Um, I really Another thing that I liked was they had a lot of merch there. They do a lot with t-shirts, Tarvis cups, all kinds of things. I mean, they had a ton of merch with the real life, real crime logos on it, and that's something I also do a lot of. T-shirts are invaluable because t-shirts are something that, number one, nobody ever throws away until they get just so decrepit and dirty that you don't want to keep them anymore. But they wear those. They wear those at the grocery store. They wear those, on vacation at Disney World. They wear those everywhere. So, so when you're wearing those T-shirts, there's no telling how many people are being exposed to your logo, and so those guys keep doing the T-shirts. I'm a big proponent of that. The Tarvis cups are good too because those are also things people don't throw away and they carry everywhere. I mean, if you're a coffee drinker, you got a Tarvis cup in your car, you're bringing it in your office. People are asking you, "Oh, what's real life, real crime?" Or what's Chapman's Paint Place podcast? In my case, so those are also real good things to do, and they have a lot. They had some tank tops and stuff that I saw. So they're doing some good, good promotion there, just from a standpoint of stuff that they produce. Incidentally, if they want to get in touch with me, I don't know where they're getting their merch produced at, but I do have a guy local in Denham Springs that I get mine from. Shout out to Sporting Center, that would love to talk to you about, giving you some pricing on some promotional goods, and we keep the money right here in Livingston Parish. Aside from all that, just a fantastic event. They really put on a show. I'm telling you, when first of all, when they came out to talk, they had a band that actually wrote the song for their opener that they do on their podcast. It's actually a very catchy song. The cool thing was the band was there. They were singing it live. And Woody does something when he gets on the microphone in his podcast booth and starts talking. He reads the Miranda rights. And so it was a really cool thing to actually have the band there singing the theme song, and then Woody coming out and actually reading the Miranda rights real time right there in front of 700 people, however many it was, and they went absolutely nuts. I'm telling you, the roof blew off the basin. It was crazy, and so I really enjoyed that part of it. The stories were nice. Uh, they weren't the only issue that it's funny, these ladies, and that's something I want to bring up before I go any further. It was probably 90% female, and I'm just wondering, what's the deal with all the guys? Why do guys not go to this? Now, there were some there, but majority of them were like me. They were there with their wife. But even if my wife wasn't there, I'd go to that podcast and check it out. If my wife couldn't make it or something, I'd still go. So I was kind of surprised there weren't other guys. I don't know. Maybe guys. Maybe I'm one of 10% of guys that are really into true crime. So I was kind of surprised about that. It was nothing but female. I don't know. Maybe Woody and Jim, are easy to look at or something, and ladies like that too. But maybe ladies in general just like true crime more than men. That could be the case as well. I know a lot of guys that like it, but that was something that I was a little surprised about, was there wasn't more guys there in the audience. But who knows what I know about that. Anyway, so moving on, it was really cool. The stories were good. I did hear some people say they were hoping he would talk about some more gory stuff. Um, I think he kept it kind of, it was. I don't want to say it was kind of light. I thought they were some pretty good stories, and there was a lot of comedy within those stories. But I know a lot of people that like that really down and dirty murder stuff, and that's one thing about Woody Overton that kind of separates him probably from really any other podcast that I've listened to on true crime is his ability to really tell a story. He paints a picture that you almost feel like you're there. And I mean, when he gets into some of these murders and things like that, you really feel like you're in the room. That's another thing about him that separates him from a lot of other folks is they're telling this in a lot of the stories he tells, they're from the first person. He was there. He smelled it. He saw it. He touched it. He used all his senses, right? And so when he does a podcast, what makes his podcast special is he's not telling a story that someone else wrote. He's telling his story, his perception in the first person. And that's something that that really separates this podcast. So obviously, I fully recommend it. Now, nobody asked me to do this. Woody didn't ask me to get on my podcast and promote his. But I was really doing this as a learning experience for me, and I learned a lot. I learned that it is very, very important to capture your audience in different kinds of ways. You can sit behind a microphone and you can sit in a booth and you can talk all day long and you'll have a fan base. But when that fan base can see you real time, live, it's different. That is one reason that I do a lot of public speaking engagements where I talk about paint coatings is because I want people to feel like, I'm not just a voice coming over a podcast and kind of garner a relationship with my fans. And that's something they do extremely well. Like I said, nice folks, super accommodating. They stayed for, I don't know how long they ended up staying. Me and my wife left well before they did, I'm sure. But I know that people stood in line for hours and they took pictures with everybody. And I thought that was pretty cool. That's something Joe Rogan, who the JRE experience is in the world of podcasting, probably the biggest podcast there is. This guy gets 1 million downloads every episode, and he does 3 or 4 a week. And that's something that he does extremely well. He's also a comedian, and I've been to his comedy show, and let me tell you, he stays and he signs autographs and he takes pictures after his comedy shows until everybody is gone. Doesn't matter if it's an hour, doesn't matter if it's 4 hours. And so when you really, really, really make a relationship with your audience, that's what got you there. And so they figured that out, and I think that's awesome. Had an enjoyable night once again. No complaints. I learned a lot. Capture your audience. Think of things that are kind of outside the box and then build on those. These live podcasts that they are doing, they have other folks that do things like that, but it's not common. And especially in their genre, that's just a perfect thing for them. And let's face it, it's a money generator. When you have 700 people show up and you're paying, $35 a ticket, do the math on that. That's a good night for anybody. So good job to those folks. Proud that they're LP guys. When it all comes back to it, they're local, and I love local folks, and really appreciate and respect what they're doing on their podcast. So great job, Real Life, Real Crime. Check it out. It's on every podcast outlet in the possible. So you can check them out on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, all those sorts of things. Check out their Facebook page. Just put in Real Life, Real Crime in Google, and you'll find all kinds of information on the good folks over there. I learned a lot. We both enjoyed the podcast, me and my wife, and hopefully I will be able to bring some really cool stuff upcoming to my fan base, which is totally different than their fan base. So I look forward to anyone who would like to go like my page on Facebook. Check me out on Apple Podcasts. Check me out on Spotify. Whatever podcast platform you listen to, I'm on a ton as well. And I look forward to bringing you the best I can in paint coatings, design, build. Builders would love my podcast. Designers, paint coating, professional painters, do-it-yourselfers would really, really get something out of my podcast as well. Totally different than, we don't kill anybody on mine, but we can sure colorize your life a little bit. So this is Jim Chapman. I appreciate you listening to my podcast, the Chapman's Paint Place Podcast, and I will see you next time.